Welcome back to Shinsen Sports, where the talk is fresh and so are the hosts. My name is Trey,
I'm Fred.
and today we are here to have a little bit of a comeback, talk about some New York sports.
Yeah. On a sunny Memorial Day Monday.
Right.
So happy Memorial Day to everybody.
Yep.
And it's good to be back after several months away.
Yeah. So let's start off. So this previous weekend, we went to see the Mets versus the Dodgers.
We were at Game 2 on Saturday.
Right.
Watched Dave Peterson pitch a really nice game. Edwin Diaz coming in, closing out the game as he should. So it was a very encouraging and, probably one of the best performances by the Mets in any game this year so far.
Yeah, and they're the two best NL teams.
Right.
So it was a...
Well, although right now the Phillies have the better record than the two of them.
Well,
No,
that's true.
Yeah.
Still, they're in that,
The discussion as to who the best team in the National League is currently.
Right. So, as you said, we saw good pitching performances from Peterson, and we saw Diaz close out the game. But the talk of the Mets is Juan Soto, right?
Right.
We were there. There's a lot of talk in sports media about his body language, his effort levels, and his happiness of being on the Mets. But first, what did you see in Juan Soto, and then I'll give what I saw.
Well, the first thing that I noticed is that the fans are very supportive of him still.
Right.
Every time he came up, everybody was on their feet. They cheered for him. So I don't think there's any. I guess there's a little bit of disappointment that he hasn't started off real hot. But I think, everybody's still on board. If you're a Met fan, you have to be a Soto fan. And you got to be a Soto fan for the next 15 years. So we all have to get used to it. I think in our game, he made a fantastic catch in the outfield. He knocked in a couple runs. He had a couple of hits. And then sort of last night, the Sunday night game against the Dodgers, which the Mets also won the series. He played a nice game. I think he knocked in a run. He stole a base. I think little by little, he's becoming more comfortable. I think comfort in playing on a new team, comfort in being the highest paid player in baseball. That's these are big psychological factors I think that players have to get over. Beltran went through it when he first signed with the Mets. Lindor went through it when he first signed with the Mets. So, there is precedence for people kind of struggling initially. And I think Soto will be fine in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing I also pointed out when I was at the game. It's the fans love Juan Soto, right? And I think that he will eventually feed off of that once he's comfortable. I know there's a whole talk about him not shuffling and doing his old antics when he was on his previous teams, but as you said, he's the highest player in baseball history.
Yeah.
He's going to need to fill those footsteps, right? And one thing that I said yesterday when we were talking about this subject is Juan Soto's always been a top 10 guy, but he's not been a top 3 guy. And I think that he eventually he feels the pressure to be that top 3 guy, maybe to the top 5 players in the league, and especially with the contract, and that's what's on his shoulders right now. But yeah, what we saw at the game, definitely the fans just love Juan Soto. Everybody was on their feet whenever he did something, and we saw that near, what was it, almost a grand slam,
Right.
but it just turned into 2 RBIs. And that was just the most electric moment that we've seen there in a while, I'd say.
Right. It was a real exciting game.
Yeah.
Playing against one of the elite teams in the league, and he played like an elite player should in a game of that level.
Right.
So we were really, really happy to have been there, and we enjoyed watching him play.
For sure. But the other end of that game was the second highest paid player in the MLB,
Yep.
Shohei Ohtani, who, as you said about Peterson's performance, absolutely shut him down.
Yep.
0 for 4, 3 strikeouts.
Yep.
And
Although the third strikeout was Diaz's strikeout.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, still,
But
he was
0 for
shut
4.
down
Yeah.
by the Mets pitching, which we discussed. And the day after, he was taking live batters on the mound at Citi Field before the game.
So his, I guess the Dodgers are working him
back
into their rotation.
Yep.
I think he threw like 30 pitches at Citi Field the other day. So, what are your thoughts on the Dodgers? You know, I mean, he had a fantastic year last year, National League MVP, first 50-50 player. So, do you risk him coming back and pitching and possibly injuring himself again, which may impact his, ability as an offensive player?
I think my logic when it comes to risk with pitchers is anytime a pitcher goes out there, it's a risk. The injuries are crazy. You know, there's new ones every year. I mean, especially last season when the most notable one that I remember was Strider went down in two starts maybe last season. So there's always a risk when you put a pitcher out there. But if I'm the Dodgers, I'm in no rush. That's a good place to start. I'm in no rush to get him back, even if he only logs a couple of regular season starts before you go into the playoffs as the Dodgers. That would be my goal. I'm not in any rush to try and get him out there and have a crazy comeback Cy Young season or whatever it might be. But he's doing great hitting now. He's one of the league leaders in home runs currently as we speak, and he's still stolen 11 bags as well. And he's I saw a stat the other day. He's doing better than in his first however many games than he was during his 50-50 season. So he's on track for an even better year. But when it comes to the stolen bases, obviously, if they're planning on bringing him back to the mound, he's not going to be cleared to steal as much.
Yeah, if he starts pitching, I can't imagine that he's going to have enough energy. I mean, you're expending you're a designated hitter that doesn't play a position.
Right.
You sit in a dugout until your time to hit. So even if it's every fifth day and you're pitching, you're expending a lot more energy that fifth day than you would normally if you were just a designated hitter. I can't imagine that we could expect another 50-50 season from him if he goes back and includes pitching as part of, what his responsibilities would be for the team.
Right, and I believe when he was pitching, I don't think he ever stole over 30. I think his highest was 26, I believe.
Yeah.
And when it comes to his timeline, I just based off of what I've been reading and stuff like that, they say after All-Star break. So that's...
we discussed the other day, even during the game, if he does come back to pitch, do the Dodgers keep him as a starting pitcher, or perhaps use him just as a relief pitcher for an inning or two when it's needed, so that you kind of save, he doesn't have to expend as much energy on the days that he pitches.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think I like that idea long term, especially because he's got however many years with the Dodgers. But on top of that, the last time I remember him throwing or being a closer, he won the WBC. So that's definitely something to...
That's when he struck out
Mike Trout. Passing of the torch moment right there. But it's definitely something that the Dodgers should consider, and I think will consider, especially now that you have Roki, now that you have Yamamoto, you have Glasnow, you have Snell. Especially if you plan on bringing him back for the playoffs, I don't see him as a playoff starter this season. I would prefer him as a bullpen guy when it comes playoff time. So if they test that in the playoffs and they like what they see there and they have success in the postseason, then I don't see why they don't continue that in the regular season as well, especially with all the talent they have in their starting rotation already, with guys like May, Gonsolin coming back, and the guys I listed before.
Right. So the other topic of conversation during the game that we were having was the future of the Mets. We're watching the team. Again, they played a great game. They played a great game last night, Sunday night game of the week. one of the players that we were discussing, one of the Met players, was Pete Alonso. Although he's cooled down quite a bit recently, he got off to a fantastic start this year. He hit a home run last night. I think he knocked in a run the game that we went. So it was like 10 home runs, 40 RBIs, batting around 280. Based upon the fact that he did not do as well in free agency this past offseason as he had anticipated, and he has an opt-out at the end of the season, we fully expect him to exercise that, especially if he continues, to perform at the level that he's been performing. And
right.
Certainly, as far as batting average is concerned, even though he's down to about 280 right now, that's higher than his career average. So, assuming that Alonso exercises his option and to opt out of the contract, do the Mets re-sign him? And if not, what is the future of first base for the New York Mets?
Well, I think there's a lot that it depends on. So Pete is having a great year to start off, as compared to his last year, but still, compared to anyone, he's still having a great year. But what we've seen with the Mets, and something else that we saw at the game, is the love that people have for Brett Baty. Yeah. I know Brett Baty's the third baseman, but even before this season, they were working out Vientos for first base.
Right.
So if Brett Baty becomes, the real deal, if this continues and he keeps improving the way he's been playing recently, I think that the Mets would be comfortable having Brett Baty at third base and continuing to work out Mark Vientos at first, despite him having a weaker season. If that happens, I could see them being okay with losing Pete Alonso, and I think they're already okay with losing Pete this offseason, but they just happen to work out, a deal that made sense for both sides.
Right.
And I don't think the Mets are, just as they would be able to live without losing him, or with losing him, they don't necessarily want to lose him.
Right.
They're going to make an effort to keep him. But if Baty continues, if Baty shows a lot of promising things or continues to show promising things, I think they're more inclined to let him walk if he decides to have a little bit of a, fight back with his contract as he did this offseason.
So that's the future, and then you mentioned two players, Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, with Pete Alonso around, and also having Jeff McNeil come back off the injured list recently, and we have a third player right now, Ronald Acuna, who's shown flashes of being a good everyday player, maybe not to the level of his brother, but certainly he brings speed to the game where generally the Mets lack in that category offensively. So there seems to be a glut. We just mentioned that, if Pete leaves, we can move Vientos to first, but until Pete leaves, there is no position really. Right now, Vientos and Baty are
just taking turns.
Yeah, they're just taking turns at third base. What are some of the things that you think the Mets could do now during this season to make sure, assuming that Baty and Vientos continue to develop, how do they get their at-bats? How do they get their innings? And how do we address the issue with McNeil and Acuna kind of overlapping at second base?
Well, I think the Mets start with Acuna. I think the Mets have been ready to part ways with McNeil for a while.
Right.
He had that one season where he was the batting champ, right?
Right.
And after that, he's become below average.
Right.
So I think the Mets have been ready to get rid of McNeil for a while, but I think they're waiting for the right opportunity.
Right.
But Acuna is very talented, right? Even now, I've been seeing graphics of him listed top 5 for Rookie of the Year.
Right.
And if he continues, and especially if he has a guy like Lindor kind of being his mentor as another infield guy, I don't see why he can't become not only just an elite guy up at bat with his speed, with his ability to hit the ball, but even as a defender as well. And even when we were at the game, he had a good defensive play.
Yep.
So he's an athletic guy, and it's only up for him really. When with McNeil, it's only downhill for him.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Beatty and Vientos, I think you need to exercise some of them more at the DH spot. I know we both like Marte at DH, but on days when maybe there's a way to.
Marte is another player, sort of in the same shoes as McNeil.
Yeah.
They were nice players at one time, but even Marte, though, he eventually hurts himself every season. He's not a player that we've been able to count on for a full season since he's come to the Mets. We could almost expect him to be injured, and hopefully he doesn't.
Right.
Hopefully he plays well, but he may follow again in McNeil's footsteps in that maybe he'll be one of the trade chips sometime down the road, maybe by the trade deadline. They may be two chips that the Mets use in order to supplement certain areas that maybe Stearns finds as a weakness as the season goes along.
Right. And that's another thing to keep in mind as well is trading.
Yep.
There have been talks of a lot of different players and a lot of different positional needs. So I think that McNeil is 100% available.
Right.
And I think that Marte should be made available.
Right.
And I think for now, they have to just see who the hot guy is.
Yep.
And that's going to be the real telling thing for that whole situation.
So we never really talked about it, but it's something that maybe we could discuss briefly at least. Is the Mets have one other player that's playing in AAA right now, Ronnie Mauricio, coming back from a knee injury. He started out very hot. Recently, I think he hit like 2 or 3 home runs in his return, first few games. Is there a future for him somewhere in the Mets lineup?
I think that there is a future for him in a Mets trade package, potentially. Obviously, he's a talented guy, but when you go down for however long he did with his injury, you don't really know what you're going to get out of him, especially after a serious injury.
Right.
So, especially with having Acuna, having Beatty and Vientos, who have all shown flashes and been big pieces for the Mets. And honestly, even though Vientos has had a slow start, he's had a huge impact for the Mets. Just look at him in the playoffs, postseason. And now Beatty's starting to catch fire. I'd rather handle, as we were talking about before, just different positional needs, and I think that he would be a good piece to put in a trade package. Because McNeil himself is not going to get the job done to get a guy that the Mets want to go over the edge.
So you don't think? Granted, right field is set.
Yeah.
for
and shortstop.
And shortstop is set for our for the foreseeable future. Nimmo's got a few years still left in his contract. They moved him to left field. Center field has been sort of a gaping hole, although Tyrone Taylor has done a good job holding it down. But you don't see the possibility of maybe getting Mauricio to try to play center field?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. I also see the possibility of a guy like Acuna playing center field, though. Yeah. If they don't decide to go on from Jeff McNeil and they decide to make other moves, Acuna's one of those guys, and this applies to a lot of players in the MLB, who's super fast, and they just throw him in the center field, and he becomes an elite center fielder. Look at O'Neal Cruz. We were talking about, I was talking about him the other day, and he's a center fielder now, and he's kind of found his position.
Right.
Even though Acuna is much smaller than him, he's just as fast.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of ways that the Mets can exercise their positions, but if they really, really want Mauricio, sure, that's something that you should keep in mind.
Right. So, touched a lot. Mets.
Right.
I guess the other big sports story here in New York recently is the New York Knicks and their playoff run. They beat Detroit in the first round, 4-2. They shocked everybody by knocking the defending champion Boston Celtics out in the second round, and now they're in the midst of the Eastern Conference Finals series against the Pacers. So they finally won last night. So what are your thoughts on basically what the Knicks have accomplished so far, and what is happening in the Pacers series to date?
So what the Knicks have accomplished so far is the statistic that we were talking about yesterday is 6-1 at away games, right. And they have the most 20-point comebacks in NBA playoff history.
3.
Yeah, which is 3 of them.
Yeah, 2 against the Celtics.
So what they've proven is that they're able to succeed in difficult situations, whether it be an away game in a hostile environment in the NBA playoffs, or whether it be a comeback that seems like you can't overcome it. And that's what I've seen from them so far. And I think that there's 2 sides to it. Is that something that's sustainable in the NBA Finals? Is that something that's even sustainable now in the Eastern Conference Finals? And is that something that a championship team would do? Going down 20 points and then having to work your way back up, not being able to win games at home and only being able to win the away games? Like, is that something that a championship team does, or do they take advantage of those home games, especially at Madison Square Garden,
right.
The greatest stadium in the world?
Right.
So there's 2 sides to their positives,
right.
And I don't want there to be 2 sides. I want there to just be, this is positive and it's only positive.
Right. Game 4 tomorrow at Indiana. This series, it could be 3-0 either way. Things break a little bit differently in 1 and 2. Certainly game 1 was a game that the Knicks should have won. That was a catastrophic choke, and they gave up game 1. And game 2, it was a close final score, but I don't necessarily believe that it was as close a game as the final score may reflect, in that Indiana had a pretty...
They had control.
They had control of the game pretty much throughout. And certainly they had control of game 3 for the first 3 quarters.
Yeah.
Anyway. So what do you think the chances are? Can they win? Can they continue to be as dominant on the road as they have been and tie this thing up tomorrow?
Well, first things first, any realistic basketball fan knew that the Knicks weren't going to just roll over and die.
Right.
Doesn't matter how disappointed that the Knicks might make their fans or whoever it may be, just basketball fans in general. They weren't just going to roll over and die and, not at least work out a gentleman's sweep.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Yeah.
So no matter what, the Knicks are going back home.
Right.
Whether it becomes 3-1 or it becomes 2-2. If it becomes 3-1 tomorrow, I don't see how... I could see how they could pull it out, but I don't see them pulling it out. But if they make it 2-2, I can see the Knicks, entirely reverse sweeping, I guess, in a 2-0 situation, right? Because we said the Knicks don't win as much at home. If they are able to take the game 4 in Indiana, I think that they're able to pull out the home game in game 5.
Right.
Kind of similar to the Celtics series, where they lost to the Celtics at Boston, but they were still able to finish the series in New York. So I think if they could get this game, they could win it at home because they feel bad about losing the first 2 at home, and then taking it in 6 or 7.
Right. Well, I agree with you. Unless they could win and tie it 2-2, I don't think they have a real shot at taking the Pacers out. I mean, I guess they've shown themselves to be pretty gritty and tough. And like you said, they're not just going to roll over. I think that's their one championship trait, is the fact that they won't give up.
Yeah.
I find it that it would almost be an impossible task to come back from 3-1.
Right. But as you said, they won't give up,
Yeah.
and that's a championship trait. But I also think a championship trait would be for them to stay in control,
Right.
which is something that they haven't done at all.
Right.
In any series, really.
Right.
I feel like they're always giving up some sort of lead. Even Detroit, those Detroit games, there were some very, very close games, and that was the team that I think me and you both thought shouldn't have been a problem at all.
Right.
And they were.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah. I mean, look at even this year. We went to 2 Knicks games during the regular season this year. The one against the Lakers.
before the Luka trade.
Yeah, before the Luka trade.
The day
of the
Luka trade.
And we also went to the Warriors when they were here in New York. Both big games. Of the two, I thought, the Warriors game was the game that we should be able to take, especially at home. Even the Lakers game, we're playing at home. It's a game that they should win, I thought.
Yeah.
But both games they ended up losing.
They were close.
Yeah,
but they fell apart in the fourth quarter, which is kind of unlike how they are now in the playoffs.
Yeah. So, the way I see it, I think we both discussed, assuming, let's just assume for a second that the Knicks win the Eastern Conference and they make it to the finals. And let's also assume the Western Conference, and I think we both agree that OKC will probably win the Western Conference. But I think we both agree that the Knicks, they just don't match up with OKC, and we don't see a scenario where the Knicks could actually beat Oklahoma City in the finals. Correct?
Yeah. Well, there's a scenario, but it's not a likely one.
Yeah.
But the OKC is just one of those teams that we talked about how the Knicks always hang on and they come back from these 20-point deficits. If you get a 20-point deficit against this Thunder team this year, they're not going to lose it.
You're just going to lose by 40.
Yeah, you're just going to lose by 40. It's going to double.
Yeah,
it's going to double.
Yeah.
And
so if the two conclusions to the Knicks season, I think we both agree, it could only end two ways. They either lose to the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals, or they're going to lose to Oklahoma City in the finals.
Yeah.
So we don't picture them winning the championship this year. Depending on how they lose, whether it be a loss to the Pacers or a loss to Oklahoma City, how do the Knicks, and how would their offseason differ depending on which way it ends? And so how would it differ, and what is it that you think they need to do in order to get over that hump and not lose the Eastern Conference Finals or the finals next year?
All right, yeah, I have two things. And my second one is they should do it regardless, but I'll just go with the first one. First one is, no matter what happens, there's no real bench depth. Right. You really only have effective minutes out of McBride and Mitchell Robinson. And that's
how long could you count on Mitchell Robinson to stay healthy?
Right. And how long can you just count on two guys,
Yeah.
right? Tibbs was getting all this criticism of just not playing anybody else and sticking with, overloading minutes, and that has never worked for him as a coach, right? When he was on the Timberwolves, he overplayed Jimmy Butler. They were out in the first round.
Right.
When he was the Bulls coach, he overplayed Derrick Rose, and we all know what happened with that story.
Right.
And I'm not saying that anybody's going to have a career-ending injury with this strategy. I think that was just an unlucky situation, but I'm saying that that's not the strategy that's going to let the Knicks be a finals winner.
Right.
Maybe they could be a finals contender as they are right now, even though they're down in the Eastern Conference Finals. But there needs to be more reliable bench depth. no matter what.
Right.
The second move, and I think this should happen regardless of if they're able to win the NBA Finals or if they lose, is you do whatever you can to get Giannis. I think that getting Giannis will be what makes the Knicks into a dynasty-level team. Jalen Brunson, people like to say he's a superstar. Other people may not see him there. I'm a little bit in the middle with him. I don't think that Jalen Brunson is a guy who you could rely on to win you a finals year after year. And I don't necessarily think anybody is like that, but there are players who, you feel much, much better about. And if you have a guy like Jalen Brunson who could get you there, but he can't win it for you, that's, not a sustainable guy to have on your team. But if you get a guy who could get you there and a guy who could win one, in Giannis, who's done it before, I could see that becoming a team that could potentially three-peat. And you do have to give up a lot for him, but I think that there's ways to figure it out to still have him and still get the bench depth, like I said before.
So do you picture, if, let's say, for instance, the Knicks do go after Giannis, which I also agree that they should, if they do go after him, do you picture next year's Knicks to have both Cat and Giannis playing in the front court together with Brunson in the back court?
That's what makes most sense to me, right? I think Cat's entire career, his whole thing has been being this big softie. Right. That's why the Timberwolves went out and got Rudy Gobert to play next to him.
Right.
And Rudy Gobert is not Giannis.
Right.
Giannis has Rudy Gobert's defense, but he has the ability to score.
Right.
And be an MVP caliber player and a defensive player of the year.
Right.
And if you put Giannis next to Cat and you have the option to give it to Brunson to get a shot, I don't see a way that team, in a 7-game series just falls apart and loses.
Right.
I don't see it happening. Giannis was able to do it with Drew Holiday. Granted, he had Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis, but Jalen Brunson's better than Drew Holiday.
Yeah.
Jalen Brunson's better than Chris Middleton.
Yeah.
Or I should say Karl Anthony Towns is better than Chris Middleton, right? If we're just going based off of teammate matchup there. And
but then we come right back to the depth, right? What do we have? Yeah. What do we have to trade to get him? And what are we going to do about the depth again?
I think that what you have to do is let's move on from this Villanova thing. Especially if you don't win this year. It was fun while it lasted. It was entertaining, but it's not the answer to winning a championship. And I think you get rid of, because the Bucks are in an interesting situation too. You have to realize they still have Dame, unless they're planning on getting rid of him too, which they might be. I think they still want to be in contention.
Right.
So if you get rid of a guy like Mikal Bridges, who has been to a finals by the way, and has lost to Giannis. You give them him, they're still in that mix, right? They still have Kuzma, they still have Damian Lillard. Obviously, you're not just giving up Bridges, and I would give up, maybe not Josh Hart, either Josh Hart or OG. As you said as well, Mitchell Robinson hasn't been a reliable guy when it comes to his health. Maybe he's in that deal as well.
Right.
I know we gave up a lot of picks, but there should be some that belong to the Knicks that we could give in that trade as well.
Right.
But you're giving up a lot there. But and when it comes to bench depth, I think you give other guys opportunities when it comes after this deal happens. You go and you give these other guys opportunities. One guy that we like a lot is Tyler Kolek.
Right.
We think that he's very similar player to a Peyton Pritchard, a TJ McConnell, who can just come out there and give you scrappy minutes, get you points if they need to be the ones to shoot the ball, make those 50-50 plays, right? He could be a guy like that.
And certainly when they send him down to Westchester to play with the Westchester Knicks, he
kills everyone.
Yeah, he plays at a really, really high level down there. So, okay, let's assume again somehow the Knicks do land Giannis for next season, and let's assume again that one of the two scenarios that we discussed earlier is what happens. They either lose in the Eastern Conference Finals or they lose in the finals. You did mention some of the criticism of Thibodeau, Tom Thibodeau, the coach, and how he uses his bench. Is Tom Thibodeau the coach that comes back to coach the team with Brunson and Towns and Giannis?
It depends. If they lose this series, I don't think so. If they make it to the finals, there's a higher chance. Because you can't get mad at a guy, even though it's happened, you can't get mad at the guy who just took you to the finals and kick him out. That's my opinion, even though it's happened, right? Like guys like the Nuggets coach just got fired.
Right.
And guys like Budenholzer, I'm pretty sure, got fired almost immediately after he won the finals with the Milwaukee Bucks. But regardless of his coaching style, Tibbs is a legend, and he brought him to this point as their coach. This was his team. He took them from, being right on the edge to being right on the edge of the playoffs to being right on the edge of the NBA Finals. So, I think that he should stay, especially if they make the finals.
Right.
And if they don't, I guess I'm willing to have the conversation of moving on from him.
Yeah.
And I think everybody will be able to move on from him.
But I wonder, there's always this talk about, Tibbs not being the right guy. But who is the right guy? And if they were to fire him, who could possibly be the option that's better than Tibbs to come in? Do you think?
I don't think there is one. I'm all for keeping Tibbs personally, but I'm just saying I could see it going that way if he's not there. And let me tell you why Tibbs would be a even better coach with Giannis is the criticism this whole season was the Knicks built this elite offensive squad, and Tibbs has always been a more defensive-minded coach.
Right.
I think if you give Tibbs more, or not more, the defensive weapon and the scoring weapon of Giannis, and then you have those offensive players around him, and let's say you're able to keep one of either OG or Hart, who are good, OG being better than Hart at being a two-way player, but still good two-way guys, I think that he's going to be able to have more weapons to coach the way he wants to, and still the Knicks will have an effective offense. So I still think that he is going to be the answer if they go out and get a guy like Giannis. But we'll see what happens when it comes to if they're done with him, if he's not able to get them a ring this year.
Well, it will be interesting to see what happens to the Knicks the rest of the way.
For sure.
Maybe we'll come back sometime in the near future and discuss the Knicks a little bit more, and certainly the Mets, and see how their season unfolds. So far, so good for them. So I think for this episode, I think this is what we had lined up to discuss.
Yeah.
We were supposed to have a guest today, but then
future
we'll have guests in future episodes.
Yeah.
But go ahead, you could close us out.
Yeah. So that's the episode for today.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us on Shinsen Sports.
Where the talk is fresh and so are the hosts. Thank you for watching.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.